Greetings to all. This is Abhivardhan from Think, and we are live again, completing the last session, which went for 2 hours 30 minutes on Indic languages and in the information age. So, I would like to introduce my panelists again. We have Chetan, we have Kiran Varanasi Vakibs, we have Ameya, and we have Anurag Shukla. We might have Kushik Raghavan also, again, as we had him last time. In the last discussion for IPMF and Think, we had a very interesting talk, kind of a crash course kind of stuff for people to understand why Indic languages are necessary for human life in this sense, why they need it, and how does it contribute. But the portion on information age and technology we could not cover because after having a discussion for 2 hour 30 minutes and so forth, it went pretty long. And so we had a consensus that, considering the public response, because many people DM'd me, they also contacted the speakers, they loved it. Some people said that there is something called they have become fanboys of Amey. They have also become fanboys of Industing. So congratulations for them. So thank you so much for the support. And to continue on that, let us discuss about the role of technologies here. Artificial intelligence will be one of the technologies and not the only technology. So to have a recapitulation for the sake of those viewers who will be watching us live, Kiran, I think you wish to discover some points about the role of languages. I remember a thread on Twitter where you stated that how languages which are considered to be residents of ecosystem languages, as well as ecosystem languages like Sanskrit and Hindi, they eventually are tended to become those museum languages, as we said, right? You gave the examples of how the relevance goes off. So if you can ponder upon that, you can give the examples of tribes and the communities across the world. And maybe from there, some follow-up points can be made by Chetan, Amey, and Anurag. And then let's jump on the portion of technology, maybe in the coming 10 to 15 minutes. So here we go.
Okay, thanks, Abhivardhan. So I would like to start with a somber note. A lot of the languages that are existing today will soon go extinct. A lot of them are potentially tribal languages spoken only by a small community of people. What typically happens is that these tribes move from their geographical areas to nearby towns or maybe faraway cities, and then the children stop speaking these languages with their parents. So at some point, there is a generation gap, but they can still understand. The children can understand, but they cannot speak. In one generation after that, even that goes away. So it's actually a matter of a couple of generations that languages that we think of as rather existing and thriving might actually go extinct. And technology is actually an amplifying factor in this destruction because it kind of coalesces all these people to speak in the same language. If people are moving to an urban settlement, they will all be forced, maybe because of work or because of the government or education, to converse in this language. So the rich diversity that we have of human languages is really very badly disappearing. And it's parallel to what's happening in ecological diversity. So a lot of species are also dying. But good news is that people are aware of this problem, and people are also forming groups to kind of revive and protect languages. Unfortunately, in India, we have less of a conscious awareness of this problem. And especially for big languages like, let's say, Kannada or Tamil or Malayalam or Hindi or Bengali, we would not think of them as languages that might go extinct. Because naturally there would be a lot of people speaking, you have TVs, movies, newspapers, and so on. But in fact, there is a decay that is happening in Indian languages, principally because there is a discrimination at the state level, at the market level, at various levels of the education and so on, so that at some point people just lose their facility of speaking with these languages, and slowly they decay. And once the decay starts, at some point, they go extinct. I cannot say how many generations it will take, but we are actually progressing fairly well in this path. So one good example to discuss here is the case of Gaulish language. So Gaulish used to be the most commonly spoken language in the geographical area that we know as France today, used to be called Gaul. And this is a Celtic language, so it's similar to Scottish, it's not Scottish, Scots, or Irish, or Irish Gaelic, they would say it, or Welsh, and some other languages also in Galicia in Spain. So these are all Celtic languages. And France used to be an important region for these Celtic tribes. And they used to speak Gaulish, and they were invaded by Rome. So the Romans established their empire, and the bureaucracy and everything was running in Roman, that is in Latin. And at some point, the Romans got kicked out. So they either left or the empire gradually disintegrated. So the fall of Rome is a very important aspect in history, European history. But then basically, the people, the Gaulish people in France, didn't have any reason why to continue with Latin or vulgar Latin or Roman languages. They could have revived their native language, which is the Gaulish. But then what happened was a new empire was started, also a foreign empire. Franks, or the Germanic tribe, invaded France, and they basically took over from the Romans. And the Franks, so there's a Germanic tribe actually. The name France comes from this Germanic tribe called Franken, and we have a region also in Germany called Franconia in Bavaria to represent them. So these people realized very quickly that they could have spoken Gaulish, like the commoners and the local people, but in fact, the elite in this society, they were actually preferring to speak in Latin. Because of the prior colonial experience, they all wanted to speak in Latin. So the education was in Latin, the elite culture was in Latin. So the Franks just decided to just switch to Latin. And what happened was, this was after the Roman Empire was finished, right? So the Gaulish language became extinct after this. So it took like a couple of generations after this, and then Gaulish became extinct. It still probably is remembered as a trace within French language now, and perhaps a few people who are language experts or some cultural experts might know how to speak it, but otherwise it's extinct. There's a different Gaulish Celtic language called Breton in Bretagne in France, which is still existing and it's still spoken. But this is a later language. It came from the British Isles. So these people used to live in the British Isles, and then they moved to France. But it's related to Gaulish. So basically, you can see that a very big language, a very powerful language, can go extinct because of socio-economic and cultural reasons. So this is studied in many different parts of the world, and people basically say there are different stages of this going extinct. And I just extended this to a little bit to also currently popularly spoken languages. And let's say we discuss these stages. The first stage is a language which is a literary cultural language. So you have a lot of literature in many, many different areas. It could be nonfiction, fiction, science fiction, children's fiction, education at many different levels. So all this is thriving. New words keep getting created. New forms of expression keep getting formed. So there are several languages like this. So this is a literary, cultured language. After this, there is a decay, and it stops being a literally prominent language. But still, it is used at work in the professional sphere. Maybe not in all professions, but in some professions, it is spoken. So it's a spoken. It's existing as a spoken language in professional arena. Maybe partly literary. You can still find books, maybe on and off, but then it's already decaying. It's making way to a different language. And I would argue that a lot of Indian languages are at this stage. In many professional areas, they have already disappeared, and in a few areas, maybe they still exist. Maybe in shops or in certain types of professions, they are still being used. But it is still as a spoken language and not so much as a literary language, and the quality has fallen down. Further down the line, the language doesn't exist in the outside sphere, in society and profession, but within the family. So it's called languages of the home and hearth. Hearth as in the kitchen, where we cook food. So we kind of use that language within the private sphere, where we speak with our family, but not outside. And this is actually the case for a lot of Indian elite. So Indian elite stopped using their native languages in the outside area. A lot of them also have immigrated to foreign countries, and they don't use Indian languages anymore, but they keep using it within the family. So this is actually a serious form of decay, and further down the line, it stops being also within the family. Within the family, the people start speaking in some foreign language, could be English, could be a different language where they moved. And the children especially make this choice. So they hear the native language, they understand partly, but they cannot speak anymore, or maybe they are shy, they don't feel comfortable, and then they stop speaking that language. And parents don't pay attention, they don't care, and they switch to the foreign language, typically English. So what happens is that it stops being even the private language of the family, but there is still people who you are forced to speak in that language, typically grandparents. So the grandparents are not so fluent in the imperial language or the foreign language like English. So when the children or the parents, have visitors at home like the grandparents, or they go somewhere, they speak that language. So it becomes very, very thin, that thread. But even after that, even that goes away. So they cannot speak with grandparents. The grandparents also switch, maybe perhaps to English or to some broken English, and the language just completely disappears. And it goes to what I would call basically some kind of a ritualistic language, where you have a special festival or a rare yajna or some kind of an event or a function where you kind of use some phrases from that language as some kind of a showing of a culture or something like that. So it's like a masala that you add to your life. It's not part of the main meal, it's just a little bit to give that flavor. And that is, on and off rarely, but people are still conscious of it, they don't want to completely get rid of it. After that very, very thin thread, which still makes it a living language, it just becomes a dead language. So nobody speaks that anymore. People only know few phrases in maybe some books, or some context in some other cultural form, or maybe in some type of a game or a theater, and that's it. And this is studied then by language experts, museologists. It becomes a language of the museum. So you see that there are like different stages of decay. And what is important to realize is that at each of these stages further down the decay, the context in which this language is used becomes dwindling and dwindling. So at some point in the very early stage, it becomes a thriving literary language. Anything in the world can be expressed in that language. Any technologically complex or culturally complex, philosophically mature, sophisticated things can be fluently expressed in that language. Then it becomes specific to certain types of professions. Then it becomes just like within the family, and just maybe some type of recognition of some familial life. So the vocabulary becomes very small, and further down, it just dwindles and dwindles. And at some point, you only remember that as like a small poem or some small memory from somewhere. So for example, we have Sumerian. We know that the language exists through some poems or some things that people found out in the museums, right? So similarly, languages can decay. So what people try to do, who are conscious of this and who are trying to revive the language, is that they recognize where they are in this chain of decay. Firstly, they try to improve themselves and try to step one step further back, so that they could speak the language at a more degree of fluency. So let's say you are at the stage 3, where it's only a family language and you are no longer using it outside. Try to find avenues where you use it a little bit outside and communicate in a professional setting. Or let's say you don't use it in the language if your family anymore, and you only use it rarely when the grandparents come. Try to find occasions within the family life, like maybe not every day, once a week. You set a time, say that you will speak only in that language. So these kinds of exclusive zones for the use of language, where everybody makes a commitment that they would try to speak, they are really necessary for some languages which are in serious decay, like Native American languages, or some South American tribal languages. So people feel a lot of force and pressure from colonial languages like English or Spanish. So they try to find like some zone where it's that particular time, it's only for that language. So you kind of have to network and try to move the language a little bit further backwards. And then as you keep working on it, at some point, the language gets stronger. So another important aspect is that these languages need resources. So books, dictionaries, thesauruses, examples of usage in essays or professional discussions. So wherever you have a language that is still alive and working, we need to document it and record it. People don't realize the importance of it, and this is how a lot of tribal languages in India are just disappearing before our eyes. So let's say you have a microphone and a video camera. One of the greatest services that you can do is just to record languages in action. Let's say in a family setting or in a cultural setting, in a group setting, all these material would be really useful later on for future speakers of the language to improve and revive. And many languages have been revived through these kinds of analysis. One great example is Hebrew. Used to be a very, very further down the line, and the chain of decay I mentioned, it was almost turned out to be a liturgical ritual language. People are not using that even within the family. But now you see in Israel, education, professional education, research, it's all done in Hebrew. So how it's done, it's basically done through documentation, revival, and analysis, and commitment. A lot of people have commitment to bring that back. So documentation is very important of these languages, and especially branching on to the topic of technology. Technology helps in analysis and documenting, and also spreading, developing apps for people to speak and exchange in language and so on. So we need to leverage whatever technologies we have to kind of keep languages alive. And in the last episode, we discussed at depth why bother at all for languages, because language is the bearer, carrier of culture and our ideas and philosophy. And without language, we cannot think in the same way. So it's very important if we don't want to lose on what connects us to our ancestors and also what connects us to the rest of the ecosystem around us, ecology and geography. We need to know these languages. So these documentations we all need to do, and Indian languages are very bad at it. We discussed that there are barely any materials for foreigners to read the language and to learn the language. And another interesting thing is that even universities that exist in India don't make any effort at all to kind of translate the concepts and the technical terminology into the local language. And sometimes it's so bad that even things that exist only in India, like, for example, certain types of plants, animals, certain geographical regions, even those names, right? So obviously they have to be first only present only in Indian languages. But what happens is the universities use only the Latin or the Greek terminology, or perhaps some stupid way how a British person imagined this to be, and you coined a word in English. So these names of the plants and birds and animals are known only in English. So you have botanical gardens in India where you have, let's say, a plant, and underneath you would have a label that would be there only in English. So not in local languages. There is no idea of that. Okay, it's as if we just had no clue of what a taxonomy meant. The reality is that it's the opposite. Indians were very, very methodical in categorizing and naming everything. So we were like the origin of taxonomy of plants, animals, and also the stars and so on. But now we just completely forgot, right? So and the university don't make an effort. So I have never seen like a proper botanical garden in India. Sadly, they don't pay attention, but it's such an important thing in a university to have these things, and they don't name these things. So this is another type of documentation that's very important, and we need to do that. So once we document all these things, and then we have a reasonable pool of people who are passionate about bringing things back, it is possible to revive languages. There is nothing like deterministic about it. There is nothing fate driven. So a lot of people are, even people who are aware of the problem, they're just so desperate, and they don't really have any optimism in this. So they're all going to die anyway. So in a generation, there's nothing given like that. So it's all a choice, what we do and what we convince our community to do. So it is possible to revive these languages based when we know what we are doing, and we document things, and we are consciously trying to improve the strength and the power of the language so that it moves to becoming like a full literary cultural language. So that is, in summary, what I wanted to say. Maybe I'll just briefly conclude by one point, which is that so people who are like us, who are passionate about language and who already made some effort to study the language. So the last time Chetan showed some books, so I decided I will also maybe show some books. So this time I was in India briefly last couple of weeks ago, and I decided to buy some books in Telugu, my mother tongue, and it's impossible to buy books in Hyderabad airport, right? So the airports don't carry any books in Indian languages, so I had to order online and get it delivered, and then I didn't have too much time, but I bought some books. So I just would like to show. So we need to read. So these are like, this is a storybook in Telugu that has some literary merit. It's nice to read. It has also some nice illustrations. Okay, I hope I'm back again. somehow lost. This is another famous writer, Tilak. It's all his anthology of what he has written. So we need to read books in the native language.
Read the titles.
So it is Devarakonda Balagangadhara Tilak, Labhya Rachanala Sankalanam. So what are the texts that are available from him? It's a compilation. So he's a famous poet, really beautiful Telugu, and is also not so Sanskritized Telugu. He also writes really beautiful native Desya words as well. And we have non-fiction and scientific texts as well. So this is actually a translation of Arthashastram, Kautliyam, into Telugu. And I need to thank my friend Haleji on Twitter to really promote this writer. He's a really brilliant guy called Pullela Sriramachandrudu. He used to be a professor in Hyderabad, and he's a famous writer and also academician, and he was a Sanskritologist as well. So he was translating a lot of texts from Sanskrit with very detailed commentary into Telugu. So I wanted to know a little bit more about Arthashastram. So this is like the best way to read, not an English translation of the same text. When these scholars are available in your language, we should definitely read it. So this is another book by Pullela Sriramachandrudu. This is called Dhvanyalokam. It is actually a text on Alankara Shastra. And he actually translated this. And he is an expert in Alankara Shastra, so on aesthetics and literary aesthetics. So I work in virtual reality and computer graphics, and always want to know what the aesthetic tradition in India has and how to bring this together to modern reality and so on. The thing is, the Europeans do that very well. So if you are in France, the people who are like working up to date, cutting edge research, they know how to connect these to what the philosophers in Greece have said, right? So they know which philosopher said what and how to connect that, and the conceptuology and the categorization follows up from there. The thing is, Indians, we don't do that. We think that this is actually a box that belongs to the past. It doesn't exist into the current world. But this is very unfortunate. So these are really, really rich and detailed aspects in cognitive science and aesthetics. So people who are studying cognitive science and AI, or in virtual reality or computer graphics, they need to know these things. So, for example, I worked on modeling virtual faces of people. Like, so we call it blend shape models for face avatars. So there are specific facial expressions that we model. These are called facial action coding system, or FACS units. So it's a psychologist, Paul Ekman, who kind of derived them, and he connected that his work to previous psychology research in Europe and beyond. The thing is that in Natya Shastra from Bharata Muni, there is actually a description of how facial expressions can be formed. What are the stable states, the sthayi bhava that are necessary to kind of make that expression, and how that brings a rasa and so on. It's super well categorized taxonomy. And we don't have a virtual avatar modeling system based on the Natya Shastra. Not yet. And this is even when we have a lot of really great computers, graphics, and researchers from India, right? So I'm not like the first guy. There are several who have worked before, and we don't have this way of analysis. So this is what I mean by a literary cultural language. So we need to kind of know the basics and the background, and then are able to connect this to the ongoing world, and we are able to develop new words and new phrases in our language to express these things. So that needs to be done at least by a few people, like the elite. um, I had a very interesting discussion on Twitter after our last episode. Um, and sadly, I come from Andhra Pradesh, and our state in India is especially bad with caring for our language. So a lot of the people are convinced that actually English would do the job, even in in the schools. Forget in the university, right? They just want to just junk Telugu. A lot. It's the majority opinion. It's really sad, but they're all brainwashed, and they don't know what is good for them. But the sad thing is that um, this is a reality, and there are certain languages in India, like Telugu, where the situation is far worse with respect to the social way of using the language. So, in such a situation, right, and the language is decay that I mentioned, it is not the job of the poor or the commoner or people who are barely trying to survive to care for the language. It's not their job. So they will try to do whatever they can just to get a better salary and something to survive. It is really the job of the elite. So people who are really capable of various professional contacts and networking, and are able to go somewhere. They already made their impact. They already are known. It is their job actually to care for the language, and not the job of the poor. So a very simple question, is these elite, right, in Andhra Pradesh or in Telangana, in Hyderabad, they might be, passionate about Telugu, or they might be actually caring about the culture. Which school would they send their children to, right? So these elite, most likely would be working for software companies or maybe some other, fancy professional thing, and they would typically send their children only to English medium schools, not to Telugu medium schools, even if we convince them that actually learning in the mother tongue is the better thing. They would be able to express better. Their creativity would be better, and even their English might be better. Right? It's like, if you know how to express things well, you would also be better with languages. So these people don't know how to do that so they just follow the crowd, the society. So it's really an important task, like how to build good quality elite schools in mother tongue. So that's the first task that we have to do, like in at least in big cities. Where is a high elite school in Telugu medium where children from the elite can come and study, and also go to abroad or do whatever, and professionally to the top. This is a trivial question in France or in Germany, because there are several such elite schools, right? It's not that hard to find, but in India, it's really sad. So this it's really the job of the elite, and it is not the job of somebody who is financed by the government or sitting in the university to do this, because they are all basically taken over by hostile parties. You have to think of it as like a enemy occupation, and we are suffering through that at different levels of hostility. So people who really care for the language may not even have the resources to move it forward. So it's really like the job of the elite who actually have the means to recognize their dharma and their duty and try to do this. So if we don't do that, our languages will certainly fall further down the line of decay. So I hope in the follow-up we will discuss what we can use technology, knowledge systems, and so on, to kind of get back onto the path of revival, because it takes a long time. We need to be also patient. It takes perhaps a couple of generations. In our generations, we may not really get to see that level of fluency in Telugu, but it is possible, and we need to use technology to the positive end. So I'll stop here, and we might follow up with the rest of the things.
Great. So before I go ahead, I think one important point you made about was the role of elites, of course. And on that, what happens is that as we discussed last time, technology is a tool, and it's not a me, an kind of an end to the means itself. It's a means to an end. So once we realize that it's a means to an end, and we have to use it in a wiser way, I think much solutions can come in. So I think in this segment, let us discuss about the role of technologies. So uh, before I go ahead, I'd like to ask Amey, Chetan, and Anurag if they wish to add something in a minute, not beyond that. And if they wish to, yeah, okay. So let's start with Amey, then Chetan, then Anurag. Just 1 minute because we need to go with the part on technology now.
Yeah, I think Kiran actually summed it up pretty well, so I don't have too much more to add to that. But I will say that in the example of Telugu and governments being sworn to a certain ideology, regardless of what the data would show. It's interesting that we actually do have such data because the Indian School of Business did a study with several students in primary school and such, and I think it was across Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. This was probably before the bifurcation, and they actually looked at cognitive ability and mathematical ability, and what they found was that the Telugu medium students were far better than the English medium counterparts. Um, and this was despite the fact that a lot of the English medium students came from richer backgrounds. They had more infrastructure, not as much poverty. So we do have such studies, but even so, that's not actually playing into the decision-making process. So I agree with you there. Yeah, that's all I'll say for now.
Great. Yeah. Chetan, add. Yeah.
Okay. And I think we can learn a lot from Esperanto. Esperanto is an artificial language. It was created 120, 25 years ago. And to this day, people speak it. Even when I met my wife, we didn't have a common language. So although both of us were multilingual, so Russian, German, Chinese, and Hindi, Punjabi, English. So how to talk? Both of us learned Esperanto, and the Esperanto community is very particular on literature. You can find even Bhagavad Gita in Esperanto, Don Quixote in Esperanto, even a course on astronomy in Esperanto. There is even an Academy of Science, Academia de Scienzo in San Marino in Esperanto. So we can learn a lot from if a few. That's what a few motivated individuals can do. That's all. And the Esperanto Wikipedia, I believe, is bigger than Hindi Wikipedia, and not more than 1 or 2 lakh people speak Esperanto. That's all.
Great. Yes, Anurag, go ahead. You can unmute yourself. Yeah.
To make one point and one pointer from my research. So, so one of my research I looked at how many of languages, especially all the great Andamanese tribes, so those languages have disappeared. So one of the last speakers of Bo language, she passed away in 2010, and now there are no more speakers of that language, of Bo language. Similarly, one of my research studies in Jharkhand looked at the structural violence around languages. So, 1971 census categorized 17 tribal languages, and in 2011 census, only 5 of those tribal languages were left. And I also visited those tribal museums which have been established by the government of India across tribal states in India, Adivasi states. And those languages now they exist there as museum pieces. So nobody is there to take care of them. The last literature on those languages was published in 80s, late 80s, and since then nothing has happened. And states apathy, like no single new recruitment in those languages. I also visited some of those universities, higher education institutions, and there also, so some of those PhD candidates they were looking for jobs, and they were looking at how these languages can be brought into mainstream. For example, Kudak, Ho, Santhali, these are some of the languages which are spoken in Jharkhand. And there was an attempt to bring those languages to mainstream, but there were not many jobs for that. So even though there were some PhD scholars which were working on those languages, they were like really in very poor situation. So some of them came to me and saying that whether like there is any jobs where they can work. So that's what I'm saying, that there are many tribal languages, Adivasi languages that are now at greater risk of disappearing in next few years.
Great. So to add up to Ameya's point on Telugu and the effectiveness of Telugu students, what we're seeing a trend in governance these days is that the role of state governments is actually at a plummeting stage, and that's actually multi-partisan. It's not just okay, fine, in non-BJP states. It's not just that. It's multi-partisan. And what ironically happens is that even when it comes to doing such things, when it comes to innovation or proper education, like I remember the Swayam initiative by the government of India, which is actually gaining some impetus. For example, I think what's gonna happen is that even when it comes to languages, a much better way to rejuvenate languages and have that sense of approach is to focus on local governments. So recently, the Ministry of Cooperation was formed. Amit Shah is the minister, so you can expect some work there. And cooperative societies and cooperative agencies under the Indian Constitution are actually very deeply, connected in the Indian society. It's not just your district magistrate and your people like them. They also include your other kind of societies and other kind of public enterprises and so forth. So I think therein, if we actually have an approach that we go for local, we say fine, there's a union government which is a strong big state. All Asian states need to be big states, strong states like India, China. You have a big state already, you need more local governments. So I think it's kind of getting back to what Ruchir always says, the Janapada system. So to quote Ruchir, it's the Janapada system, which is at a local level may be needed for language rejuvenation. So okay, so let me bring a context in 2 minutes about technology and the role of technology. So the reason why you wish to add.
I have a nice bridge to the technology thing and also to connect to the comments. So I'll try to wind up in 2 minutes if you can give me the time. So there is actually a very interesting article by Paul Graham. He is the founder of this startup. I don't know what they call it, but essentially an aggregator of startups called Y Combinator. And he's a very famous guy. And he's a champion of the Lisp programming language. So Lisp is one of the AI, and he has a very interesting essay called "Startup in Lisp." Why you have to beat the average, and how to do a startup in Lisp. So I would just paste the link here in the private chat. Maybe Abhivardhan can share it. So what this says is that he says that all programming languages are not equal. Some are superior, and some are actually at a high level of abstraction, so that other concepts can be very easily expressed, and in fact, other languages can be simulated by this language. So it's actually, if you know Lisp very well, you can actually learn other programming languages very well and know their weaknesses and strengths and are able to adjust things and so on. So this is something that a good computer scientist would know. And Lisp, by the way, is influenced in some sense by lambda calculus. It's a mathematical programming language, and lambda calculus itself, in some sense, is related to Sanskrit, especially the Paninian Ashtadhyayi. So the idea of the pratyahara and how we can put concepts together. So essentially, Lisp is, so it says that you have one very interesting aspect of Lisp, which is macros, where you write programs about programs. So program about other programs, which are about other programs, and it goes into this level of meta recursion. And you can express very powerful things like that, like new ideas, new concepts can be formed. Essentially, in human languages, there are also very different levels, and some languages are like Lisp, especially the Sanskrit language, and the language that Chetan mentioned, Esperanto. It's also very heavily influenced from Sanskrit, and it actually, if you know Esperanto well, you would be able to speak a lot of European languages because it is able to run these other languages as programs in Esperanto, essentially. So Sanskrit is something like that, and it's something that linguists know very well, and we Indians unfortunately lost that sense. So if, let's say, these tribal languages who are really facing a lot of trouble, if these linguists in tribal languages are able to latch on to Sanskrit and connect to the Sanskrit terminology and conceptuology, ontology for scientific concepts, and also extend them to these native languages, they would be able to bring these languages all knowledge systems in it. So this is actually what we previously discussed as ecosystem language. So I hope I just made that point. So I'll just stop here. There are languages which are very, very powerful, and it's really directly connected to AI and what we can do with technology as well. Yeah.
Great. So I think you made a very interesting point. I've already shared the link in that tab. So people who are interested to know more about, you can just roll back from this video and you can see the link exactly, and you can go there and read about it. And so let's go ahead with the discussion fast. So whenever we talk about technology, what generally happens is that uh, there are various technologies which I say these days disruptive technologies. And when I say disruptive, we all understand what it means in an obvious sense, right? They affect us, they affect our lives in a much deeper way. Now, I'm not getting on the question of motive, because again, entrepreneurship actually involves you to be innovative. So yes, you will be quite interventionist in your way. I mean, otherwise, how will you create technology? That's a different question. If you are getting on privacy and security and other reasons, that's a different question altogether. I'm not getting on them. But the way technology forms is like that. So that's a basic thing. So I think Ameya will join in a while. So if we see disruptive technologies, among them I famously more focus my uh, uh, research on AI, but I'll extend the talk not to just AI, another disruptive which we can discuss. And maybe Kiran can take a lead until Amey joins again. So how should we see the way disruptive technologies work from a level of anthropology? Simply because first, they impact human lives, and second, they impact human lives, they have a much permeable impact, and that affects the way languages work. If we do not have, let's give a simple example to this to make a context. So let me say that we have classrooms, online classrooms, and we say that, what, we just can't have it in native languages and only English. What happens is that your confirmation biases and all of those ways through you cognitively understand and act, you will be kind of be mired with English in the way you wish to be, so that you can just adjust yourself and get things done. That is one very mediocre example I'm giving, but I'm only giving for the sake of the viewers, and of course not for the sake of my understanding. But so to see this, I think okay, so let me bring Ameya first, and then Kiran, and then Anurag and Chetan can add up. So if we see the role of disruptive technologies in a basic way, anthropologically, how they affect human lives, how should we connect it with the way that yes, native languages should not just be revived, but also evolved and rejuvenated in that sense. And then we can further our discussion on maybe some specific technologies, some examples can be given, and we can extend. So Ame, here you go.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent question, first of all. There's a lot to unpack there. So I think we need to view this from the perspective of sort of democratization of knowledge. I think this is something that I mentioned last time, right? Sort of connecting from the points that Kiran made. Again, we need to make the economy more inclusive, and this is generally going to involve democratizing the knowledge so that it is accessible to a larger number of people. Now, I think technology can aid in that, but also on the flip side, we need to do our part to basically introduce technology, introduce Indic languages into technology, right? So one example is, if you look at, say, e-commerce in the country, right? Right now, it's very English focused. You look at a lot of schemes like GST and such. There are many people who are like, okay, there are these English forms, and we don't know what to do with them. And then, this is supposed to streamline processes, but eventually people just give up on it. So I think there needs to be more of an educational process to introduce technology into the Indic sphere. So, so one example we can put into perspective is bringing in, let's say, keyboards, right? I think a lot of the technology development has taken place in English, and if you, Kiran talked about this literary decline, right, in the language. That's sort of the first step toward extinction. Well, I think that the literary decline is often the harbinger for what comes next, which is, you see that Indic languages are underrepresented in the technology sphere, right? I think there was this graphic that someone shared on Twitter, which showed like the top 10 or 20 spoken languages, and obviously there's a bunch of Indic languages like Hindi, Bengali, Telugu. And one of the points I raised was, okay, now compare this to sort of the language presence on the internet, right? And despite Hindi being in the top 5, let's say, it is nowhere to be found in the top 20 of languages on the internet. And for that, I think we'll have to have more technology penetration that is not just English focused, right? So what can we do specifically? There's been a lot of research around input methods and keyboards, and I think with smartphones, this has gotten even easier. A lot of the typing systems on Android or iPhone, they've gotten a lot easier for Indic languages. One of the nice things is that we already have a standard for laptops and desktops. I see Abhivardhan brought up the graphic there. So one of the things is that we have a standard called InScript, which has been in place for quite a while. I would suggest making that part of the education, right? When in primary school, we need a more technology-focused education. So one thing you can do is mandate that each state in India, when they deliver keyboards, they should have the standard A, B, C, D, but they should also have the corresponding letter of the script of that state corresponding to the InScript keyboard overlaid on the keyboard. And in fact, this is how I learned to type according to the InScript layout. I bought myself some stickers and just put them on the keyboard. So you can do that too. So I think this needs to be infused into the education system. And it's quite easy because basically any of the Indian scripts that conform to, say, Panini's rules in Ashtadhyayi and such, they pretty much have the same structure, like the ka, kha, ga, kha, nga, they have the same letters. So basically the only difference is what the output script is. So if you know how to type in Hindi, you know how to type in Bengali or Telugu. It's just a different output script. So I think we have it much easier in this regard, right? If you look at what other countries like China or Japan had to do, right? In China, you have these characters, and there's thousands of characters, and so you need to devise some smart input method. In our case, it's phonetic, and there isn't any such complication. But if you see what they did, that's quite remarkable. And there's I think the main point I want to get across is that there's this sort of sense that English is what will technologically empower people, but in some sense, it is actually what is keeping people behind, because as we see, the English market is saturated right now. There's a reason that tech companies are talking about the next billion users, right? That is going to come from places in India, places in Africa, and this is largely going to be in among people who use a language other than English. And I think also there tends to be a conflation, I think, between, say, globalization and internationalization or localization. And there are very specific terms that are used in the software industry or in tech companies around internationalization. And really the point is that you develop a piece of software and you make it so that it can be accessed by different parts of the world, right? So that would include localization, which means you translate it into the language or use things according to that country. So that's what is part of globalization. Whereas there's this kind of sense among many in India, I would say that globalization means, okay, just converting everyone to English and just not developing the local languages. So I think we need to change that mindset.
Great. So I think Kiran might wish to add something, and then Anurag, and then Chetan and Anurag. So Kiran was to add. I think let everyone add, and then I'll ask some follow-up questions. Yeah.
Yeah, Maya had a lot of nice examples and also spoke about really the important aspect of language input and language tools to interact with the internet and AI technologies and so on. I just want to say that the technology is moving really fast, and we are trying to build tools typically for what exists today or sometimes even what existed yesterday. So, for example, now voice computing is getting very powerful. And voice computing in Indian languages is really bad, right? So we don't have that. And similarly, a lot of AI technologies for build image processing and object recognition, 3D reconstruction, and so on. The terminology doesn't exist, and also the labels, what these objects mean. So you have actually an army of people who are annotating all these images and saying what is there in it, what does it say, and so on. So these are actually the means and the tools through which the AI technologies learn about the world, right? None of these labels and annotations are in Indian languages. So it's really a disaster in coming years if we don't enable Indian users and Indian language speakers to express about the world in their own languages, maybe through voice, maybe through annotations, through some tools. But AI technology is really developing very fast. So what might happen if we don't do that, right? Actually, this is the critical thing, and people know about it in Europe very well, because if we don't have democratized technology, we don't have a democracy. Essentially, our democracy will be taken over by basically aggregating monopolies who can basically drive people's thoughts and actions in some predefined pathways. So this will all be done in a foreign language, in English, which we don't understand. And the kind of news that is presented to us, what the kind of things that are being filtered in different settings, either a search engine or a social media website, it's all done in a foreign language based on some justification about some annotation which may not reflect our reality in India. So essentially, this is the threat. This is the threat to our democracy if we don't really wake up and build these tools. So I will just stop here. So essentially, it's not just the current world, but also the coming world where the AI tools are being built and basically nothing is being done in Indian languages. So this has to be started right now, so that maybe in 10 years we have a fighting chance. So if not, we will not have a democracy. So that is actually my point. Yeah.
Great. Chetan, I'm just sharing the screen. So here we go. Yeah.
Okay, I think, yeah, I wanted to talk about what an uphill challenge China and Japan had in the 1970s, because at first they were really scared after typewriters appeared, because neither of those languages could be written on a typewriter. The Japanese still had a phonetic script, but Chinese, it was a hopeless situation. And then out of a sudden, there came computers, and in China, there was no way to just simply input their input Chinese. And I listened to an interview. There is also an English translation available, so I'll share the link. That when Chu Bongfu of Taiwan, he really created this keyboard layout for Chinese. Well, I do not know how to maybe connect it. I have shared two characters with Abhivardhan. Is it possible to show them and maybe enlarge them a little? So the story is that he was in Brazil, and in the 1970s, and And oh yes, correct. Look at the first character. That's Meng. Meng is the Chinese dynasty. How do you type it? There's no way. But now look back at the keyboard. You press A and then B, and suddenly space, and suddenly you have Meng. A B. Do you notice it? And then for the second letter, you press J because it has a plus, then again J, then B, JJB, and you have dynasty. That's how the Chinese. That's how Chinese started inputting their language. Currently, there are two main shape-based methods in China. One is Changji, you see it on your screen, and the second is Wubi. And they were really popular until the year 2000. But today, a lot of people prefer pinyin. So instead of all this pressing A and B, they simply write MING space, and suddenly a character appears. Yeah, so all I wanted to say is that if there is a will, there is a way. If they could do it, of course, we don't have such a huge challenge. Okay, that's all.
Great. Anurag, before you, as you add, then I'll add, because we'll then discuss a little bit about technology policy in India, and then we'll see what we can, converse accordingly. So first you add your points. Yeah.
So in 2018, Niti Aayog released a report on AI policies, AI strategy in India, and it has no mention on AI policy in Indian languages. So everything kind of revolves around English, and how and looking at the cost, looking at the research and development, but nothing around the languages, how AI can be adopted in Indian languages. And yes, in national education policy, there is a separate section on AI in education. But again, that section is very technical. Not It does not actually talk about the how languages are going to dealt in AI strategy. So like, just one point. So we are still dealing with AI at a very superficial level.
Okay, I think Ameya wish to add. So let Ameya add, and then I'll give my, what we call collective pointers, what I understood from all of you. So Ameya, first add. Yeah.
So what was the question again? Just to
Right. I think when Anurag was talking about Niti Aayog, you wish to say something, or like about particularly Niti Aayog wish to do something on AI, or like particularly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I actually agree with Anurag on the criticisms of the report. But I do think actually there are some interesting things in the Niti Aayog report which are worth looking at, right? Which is that I think there are a few things that they actually diagnose correctly, somewhat to my surprise. Whether they have all the solutions, I'm not sure. But one of the points that they make is let me just say, try to quote it here. So, they say that India produced a whopping 2.6 million STEM graduates in 2016, second only to China, and more than 4 times the graduates produced by the US. And then they go on to say that the majority of the talent pool is focused on routine IT development and not so much on research and innovation. Exacerbating the problem further, a majority of the small population focused on research almost always prefers to pursue advanced degrees to subsequently apply their expertise abroad. Okay, and then it goes on to say how there's something like 22,000 PhDs, PhD educated researchers, and India has only about 400 or so in AI. And they look at various metrics of publications and such, and they conclude that mostly serious research work is limited to a few institutions like the IITs, the IIITs, Indian Institute of Science, and such. So I think it gets this right. And connecting this back to a point that I made last time, right? So I do think that AI is going to be a disruptive technology, and one of the arguments that we've seen up until now has always been that okay, English will propel India forward, and we've rested on these call center jobs, IT service jobs. Even putting AI out of the picture, right? I do not think that this is something you can scale to a population of over 1 billion people. Just these service jobs are not enough. If you look at other countries that have managed to develop economically and kind of propel themselves into the modern world, it has been generally through development of strong industries in their countries, sometimes manufacturing and such. So, I don't think that's necessarily a path. And exacerbating the problem is AI now, right? Because I think some of these jobs, even in the manufacturing space, who knows, right? There's increasing automation there due to various technologies. Service jobs, of course, I mentioned conversational AI last time. And one more point about this that the Niti Aayog report actually mentions is also that they comment on how IT service companies like TCS, Wipro, Infosys, and such, they were implementing cutting edge technology solutions. Maybe, I mean, it's disputable whether that's still the case because I think there's more competition now, but at least let's say go back a decade or two, that was the case. Yet their contribution to research has been limited. Okay, that's what the Niti Aayog report says. And if you look at research publications coming out of India, only 14% have been from industry. And if you look further in this industry, it is dominated by international companies that have Indian subsidiaries, right? So companies like Microsoft and such. So basically your TCSs and companies, obviously they were able to build something through getting the money through labor arbitrage, but what they did not do was reinvest that in fundamental research, right? So I think that's a problem that you're seeing. On the other hand, if you look at the example of, say, China, they were also competing largely through competitive wages, but the difference is that they reinvested that and had a national vision to go beyond that and become a leader in the technology. So I think that's more or less what you need to see on the policy front from India moving forward.
Yeah. Yes, Kiran.
I would like to just add a comment. So last year, the Indian government had a very interesting virtual conference called RAISE 2020. So it is Responsible AI for Social Empowerment. That is the title. And they had actually a very nice set of sessions and panelists in different topics related to the use of AI and also how to bring that into the Indian context for various social problems or economic problems, and also in the education context. So I was there for a few of the sessions, and these sessions had quite a few Indian faculty in Indian universities, top industry leaders, but also Indians who are maybe working abroad, and also various foreign researchers as well from various companies. Very interesting session. I want to add two comments. One, the entire session is in English, and it has not been reported in Indian language media. No, nothing. So even the Indian government actually even didn't bother to even summarize these proceedings of what was discussed, the key ideas to the Indian population, because they didn't care. The Indian population doesn't care about what's AI. So essentially, there is actually a lack of awareness, even in people who may be potentially interested to, who may have recognized the threat of AI or the importance of AI for the nation building and so on. There is actually a blind spot that they don't really, just do the obvious thing of, at least giving a communique or publishing the proceedings in Hindi and other Indian languages. I would say that certain may be funded by the Indian government. There has to be a parallel funding to just translate this material. Maybe there can be some reporting by TV reporters or whatever. So there is actually a nice bunch of people in this area of the digital AI and Niti Aayog's associative group. They keep publishing YouTube videos and so on, but they just are in this world of English. Essentially, we are thinking of AI and other disruptive technologies as if we have to first get to the English island, And in that English island, there are some bridges to disruptive technologies, because basically without getting to that island, we will not get. If you think like this, we are screwed. Essentially, we will not be able to do anything. Another interesting comment from that session is that there was a session on education, on how to use AI for education, right? The entire session was in English. That's one thing. It's as if Indian people, want to study in English, right? Otherwise, they don't get education. It's completely blind to the fact that a lot of the Indians actually study in English, study in Indian languages. Secondly, there was a startup, was I think acquired by Reliance or so on. They had a field study of how their AI technology is improving education and so on, right? So it's like an experiment, interesting experiment to kind of develop new technologies and so on. Guess what? They did this experiment in English medium schools. So how is it actually relevant to Indian context? Essentially, even the way you think of using AI for Indian context, there are blind spots. And these people are not malicious or stupid. They just are blind. Nobody told them that these things are important. In the same session, there was Microsoft popularizing, how to use Minecraft for Indian education. So Minecraft, virtual reality, and computer graphics. There's a lot of great ideas how to use that to teach programming and so on. Comes all the way from MIT, the work of Seymour Papert and Marvin Minsky and so on. Anyway, this Minecraft for education has a website, and it does not exist in Indian languages at all. Forget that particular Minecraft website. There's like very few international companies who operate in India and get a lot of revenue in India who don't even bother to have an Indian language website. They don't have it. Forget international companies, even Indian companies don't have. I would be very surprised if TCS has, for example, a website in Tamil or Telugu, even though a lot of the engineers come from these regions. Essentially, it's a blind spot. They're not aware of how fundamentally wrong we are in India. Just compare with some other European country, you would see the obvious discrepancies, right? So essentially, it's what I'm saying, right? We have to first get like some basic common sense in India. That basically means we need to make the material available and tools available in all Indian languages. Then other things would follow. So I think I hope people would realize this and follow up on this in the coming years at least. Yeah.
Sure. So
yes,
okay, you added, yeah.
Yes, awareness. Even when they are aware, I don't think they. For example, I had a conversation with someone back in my state, Punjab, and they and the reaction was, if we offer engineering degrees and medicine degrees in Punjabi, then फिर तो ये सारे साडे खिलाफ आ जाएंगे, compete करेंगे. Then all these people will compete with us. By all these, the person meant these maids, these rickshawalas, then they will all compete against us. No. So I believe even when people are aware, they do not want it to happen. Not everyone, but a certain part, some of them. So I still remember the quote. It's been many years.
So there's a question, very very intriguing question, but I think we might address this. So question by Shubham Vyas. Question is, Indian languages have become unattractive according to him, as it seems. Could it be that there's a mindset that anything in Indian languages is incompatible with technology or AI? So I think you can respond to that, and maybe then I'll try to add my pointers into it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a colonial hangover, obviously, which pervades throughout the society. But also, again, I think that this often is a sentiment that comes across from a misunderstanding of what globalism is, right? Like you will see, I think there was a discussion we had on Twitter, and I was actually remarking to people that often the people who are extolling the virtues of English medium education, for instance, are the actual Kupamanduks, so to speak, or the frog in the well. And I think it is because many of them either have not stepped outside the country, or if they have, they've generally been to Anglophone countries such as the US, Canada, UK, where maybe they haven't interacted with as many people from other countries where they studied in a different language. So I actually recommend to people, I mean, broaden your horizons a bit, and as Kiran alluded to, if you go to Europe, you will see a stark difference in the way they deal with things compared to India, right? So I think there's this misunderstanding, right? So globalization means English for a lot of Indian elites, but as I mentioned before, globalization means no, actually, you want to make your product, to use like the World Wide Web or software kind of terminology. You want to make your product accessible to different parts of the world, and that includes actually translating or sort of converting it to work for the people of that country, not the other way around. You're not forcing other people to come into your kind of narrow box. So I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding, and again, like I don't think it's malicious, but I think people just generally don't understand something is broken. So as far as incompatibility, I don't know if people necessarily think that. I just think that no one really thinks about how Indian languages fit into AI. If you look at the NITI report, as Anurag mentioned, there's no mention of Indian languages. Again, I think it's just an afterthought for people. That's and you see it in government websites as well. Kiran mentioned that he would be surprised if TCS has say a Hindi version of the website. I mean, with a lot of government ministries also, I mean, if you look at, sometimes they don't even have a Hindi version of the website. And if they do, it's it's very shoddy quality compared to the English version, and some of the terms are awkwardly translated. And I think it's, again, because this is the logical consequence of not investing in resources to develop the Sanskritized technological terminology in a base of words, which is ironic because if you look at actually, I think it's section 351 of the Constitution, it does talk about promotion of Hindi and using it, using Sanskrit to enrich the language and, its interplay with other regional languages as well. But yeah, I think it's generally just a blind spot.
Yeah.
Well,
So
yes,
I'd like to
this
emphasize.
mindset.
I think no issues. Yeah.
This mindset, I believe, matters because if you look at the Arab world, they almost in all the Arab countries, higher education is either in English, such as Iraq or Saudi Arabia, or French, such as Algeria or Morocco, and they do not translate much into Arabic. If you look at the state of Arabic Wikipedia, it's not much better than Hindi Wikipedia. Now, in contrast, you have Persian, another Muslim culture, but they have a thriving community. If you want a book on, for instance, differential equations, it's available in Persian, but not in. I don't think such books exist in Arabic. So mindset matters as well. So Iran alone produces more books than 20 or 25 Arab countries combined. That's, I believe.
So I just want to say that it's obvious what's the difference, right? Colonization. So countries which are colonized, which have directly been administered in the colonial language, either English or French, they had their native infrastructure destroyed. And that is basically a blind spot for the elite. They don't realize what is missing. We had a very interesting comparison in India. India is colonized, obviously, right, by the British. But we also had the princely states. So the princely states were running their administration in native languages. And they were also investing in translating technical terminology. They were printing dictionaries. They were actually even publishing scientific textbooks in native languages. So, for example, in Telugu, there is a famous textbook, a dictionary called Surya Rayandra Nigantuvu, published by a small, tiny kingdom, a principality in Vijayanagaram, a little bit to the Orissa border. Not rich at all, but they did that work. So similarly, work was being done in Indore, I think, and some other princely states. the really sad fact is that after the independence, the situation went south. The situation got really much worse because the Nehruvian state really just completely, strangulated the Indian language and especially Sanskrit. So what happens was, over a period of decades, we really had follow-up of what's happened in France, like in this disappearance of the Gaulish language. Similar things are happening in India, primarily because of the choices of our own elite. So colonization is the key factor, and decolonization is really the solution for how we are going to, find a solution to this thing. Yeah.
Yes, even
I
in
ju-
Hyderabad, I believe you could study physics and sciences in Urdu, Osmania University. But after independence, they ditched Urdu and there came English. And now they're fighting over the logo. Should the logo be in Urdu or Hindi? Ignoring the yuck. So that's all.
I just want to say one more thing. So, ironically, you see, we discussed whether TCS has an English website, but if you look at some of the foreign companies coming in, they often seem to understand it better than the Indians, right? For instance, if you look at Amazon, I think they did release a Hindi version of the website in India, and I think other regional languages also, maybe Kannada and others. So
Mara.
Yes. So I think that is driven also by the business, because I think, again, there's been a saturation in the sort of English-speaking market in India, and there's this focus on the next billion users and such. So economically, it will be viable, and I think companies will be forced to do this moving forward. But I think there's still a role to be played in terms of having tech people interact with people who have linguistic knowledge and trying to coin the right technical terminology. Otherwise, you just end up with awkward translations, or basically an English word that's just dressed up in a local script, right? Which actually makes for bad reading experiences. At least I think so. Yeah.
I think Anurag wishes to say something. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So just one small comment. So I also feel that there is a serious lack of leadership in India when it comes to AI and other technology adoption in Indic languages. And there have been some few philanthropic private initiatives in India on the lines of, like in US, Black Girl Code. In India, there have been several such initiatives. One taken by one very prominent newspaper group, and one by IIT Madras, and with Amazon. But in all of those initiatives, the emphasis was on English. So first, teaching those girls how to code in English, and some higher secondary students were also brought in, and they were taught AI skills again in English. And I was part of some of those initiatives, and most of those girls were completely lost. First, they were not able to communicate in English because they were coming from different regions of India. So, like some of them were speaking Chhattisgarhi, some of them were speaking Hindi, some of them were speaking Rajasthani. So first barrier for them was to speak in English, and then this whole AI performance became just became too much for them. So after the session, those sessions, like it was 2 day long session, and I interacted with some of those girls. So they did not learn even a single thing, and it was like, okay, so we have just come to Delhi because we have been brought to Delhi by these NGOs and by these companies. Otherwise, we have no interest in like furthering our career in this. So there is also a serious lack of leadership in India, especially when it comes to technology adoption in Indic languages, even in private sector, like even if not even in government, but even in philanthropic initiatives.
Yeah, Anurag mentioned this very interesting point. So I would like to re-emphasize this. The task of bringing technology to India, reviving it, it is not the job of the poor. It is the job of the elite. And the elite has to recognize its responsibility. So if they don't, actually, it's their own problem also. At some point, their growth would stall. So India cannot grow. So if they want to get richer, they have to work on it. So even if so pathetically saying they don't have any awareness of their identity and awareness of their culture. At least they have to be aware of their wealth. So if they don't work on it, nobody else is going to do the job. The pure poor people won't be able to do it. I have heard a story like so there was some really nice opportunity for people in villages to come and study computer science and so on, established in Andhra Pradesh. And the first year of this thing was to learn English, obviously, because everything was in English and they cannot speak in English. So they were really being forced through some interesting means, like they were asked to watch series of the sitcom Friends. It cannot get more surreal than that. So really trying to immerse themselves into the English language dictum and so on, and then understand technology and whatever. And there were cases of suicides of students in this place. So this is not, a funny thing. It is actually a serious problem. We have a choking of the bandwidth of the talent because all our stuff is running only on English. And even the people who are managed to swim a little bit in English, they are able to do really badly in comparison to what they could have if they were able to express in Indian languages. I think the right solution for us probably would be to send some of our elite to China or some other country and see how that works, right? And then implement that in India, not just follow from the United States, because we have actually, unfortunately, a colonial mindset, and we are not able to get over it. Yeah.
Just one brief point. So I think yes. I think ultimately the business class will care about the wealth, right? So from that perspective, we have to invest in Indian languages. Some may ask, if the eventuality of this is extinction of languages, and then somehow generations later everyone switches to English, and then it becomes like a native language. What's the problem, right? So let's say you don't care about the cultural arguments or the literary arguments at all, right? Even then, so what is the argument here? Well, I would argue even in the process of reaching that point, we will have lost a lot of useful time. I mean, you have to strike when the iron is hot, right? With disruptive technologies like AI, clean energy, all these sorts of things. I do think there will be some big players in the geopolitical sphere, and if you don't strike while the iron is hot, you eventually fall behind, and could become a vassal state of some other country, let's say.
Yeah, to what Amaya said, we have to strike right now because we have a youth dividend. So the population is growing. At some point, it will stabilize, and we will grow old as a society. So then we will be useless. We cannot compete. We are basically, staring at a serious problem of stagnation. It's not a given that we will become a developed country or even a partially developed country. So we have to do right now, and we cannot do that through English. So that is the problem.
I listened to an interview of the president of Madagascar. He speaks wonderful French. But again, Madagascar is a basket case. I believe no one wants to live there. Compare that to Japan or Korea. They do not speak English or French with that proficiency, but still they're doing well.
So actually, there are so many points that I wish to add and collate them, because we have to discuss about the Anglo-Saxon bias. But I think we have discussed about the Anglo-Saxon bias in some fronts. So I'll jump on the to be very fair about basic steps to indigenize and Bharatize, and so very important data points to be understood. So this decade of okay, somebody commented Abhivardhan can finally make a point now, Lamau. So fine, thank you. I actually love the discussion, did not wish to intervene. So yeah. So see, I think one thing which we can understand is that at a policy level, we have this decade where young population is there. Maybe for some more years after this decade we will have, and then that inflection point will come as Kiran said, and we'll just be stuck, and we might get into the state of being aged. So what happens with this whether AI policy and its incorporation, as I 100% agree, it's not malicious, it's clearly very blind spotted. So people in the Niti Aayog and the government agencies, what happens is that the think tanks and the actors are related, and this is my experience which I wish to share, is that they whenever they frame policy, I'm not even getting on the issue of language. Let's assume they use English for their own, working purposes, whatever. Their reach out when it comes to communities and regional realities is pretty low. Very few organizations who go for surveys actually are able to do that. For example, the 2018 NSAI, which we had discussed, they cited US data, after which, when this 2021 in August or September, they came up with a responsible AI report. They said one interesting thing, and I want to share that with the viewers and all of you. So I have been very much advocating that AI ethics principles, whatever you make in, they should be technologically nuanced and practical, but they should be Indic also. And they have to be Indic on two grounds. First, see where Indian philosophy and Indian knowledge systems can work out. It's not about, okay, fine, you just read some shloka of Rigveda and just put it there. Okay, fine, this is just responsible AI concept. Aise nahi hota hai. This is not the way how people do. I know some people say, you know what, just put something from S.N. Balgangadhar or Radha Krishna, lal do ho gaya AI ethics. Aise nahi hota hai. That's not AI ethics. That's what constitutional law people unfortunately do when they read constitutional law. But constitutional law and technology are different fields. But practically, that is one thing. You need philosophy, because that actually tells you how you understand your geographical and native realities. Otherwise, what's the purpose of Indian philosophy, Indian knowledge systems? That is one part. Second part which comes in is that since Indian knowledge systems are important, what are your anthropological realities? Because due to globalization, we have to understand that neoliberalism is in a black backlash. So local communities, local MSMEs, and all of these will need support, so that when India becomes the leader, and it will become the leader because of two reasons. First, I mean, to be very fair enough, on a civilizational level, China's alternative is India. And it's not about Indo-US ties at all, practically speaking. It's not about the Quad also. I think I remember a discussion with Velina Shakurova, and she's proposed that even in IR, what we can do is, instead of being too much allied to the US, we can be non-aligned, which I call as multi-alignment, as I discussed with Roger, because it's not non-aligned movement. You have the assets, you have the army, you know what to do in some ways. Diplomatically, you are conscious about. But you have an approach which is more Indo-European. You are panning up to West Asia, Southeast Asia, and up to Eastern Europe, and you are engaging. You have also African actors with you. That is where India can do. The problem which I always see, and that can translate in various aspects of policy, is not balancing the American validation problem, which actually can actually come in. That's why I think Waqib's or Amey said about, that island mentality. Arey nahi nahi, sab log ek island mein aa jao, English seek lo wala. That problem, as we discussed about, that same thing which was there, and it's because of that. So I think it's not malicious. I agree. It's heavily blind spotted, and it's blind spotted because the policy approaches of the think tanks are unclear. Like, people were talking. You all were talking about India AI, which portal which publishes about AI updates in India. That is the portal. I know about the portal. Pretty good portal. Publishes some stuff on computer science. They organized RAISE along with the METI and Niti Aayog last year. Actually, very good conference. I could not attend all the sessions, but tried to do a few. So I think one problem which we simply have here is, I think, ठीक है, we recognize that Anglo-Saxon bias is here. We will call it out. We understand that we have to internalize the way we use languages. Very good, but okay, apostasy, fine. But yeah, one thing which is there is that I think what is needed is, practically speaking, first, there should be a feedback mechanism, and it has to be done very fast. I think what happens generally, in this is my experience, is that in law and policy, mostly think tanks are limited to India. We have 4 cities or 5 cities in India. They don't wish to cater much consideration or considerable policy opinions. Like, I came up with a very, very important work, and I've been working on for months with my team, which was about digital colonization and competition law. So we did not limit it to the Twitter government of India war, which everybody talks about all the time. We also extended it to technology companies, and we said that, what the problem is, we just don't understand how public policy works. So my pointer to add here is, very simply, is that I think first strategic alignment happens in policy by understanding and not being blind spotted, and understanding yes there are some obvious and non-obvious things, and then you have to tangle around. I don't think in so I forgot to tell about that point. Sorry, what Niti Aayog was right about it. Niti Aayog said that most AI ethics concepts which develop in the world, they're West centric, and this is something which even I have been trying to say that too much West centrism is not okay. You can't rely on that. You need to you need to create an adaptive approach between the Chinese BAI, the European Union approach, and the American approach. You just can't be limited, say, oh नहीं American से अच्छा है, कुछ GDPR से bill बना लो, and then take some cybersecurity approach from China and बस उसका एक खिचड़ी बना के for convenience use it. That's not how it works, because those who made it know the hack. So I think we can discuss about that later, but I think that's the main point. So let's get on the final part of this discussion, because I think that would be much better, and I think we can wrap it up in the coming 20 minutes, or maybe 10 minutes, or 15 minutes. So the question is simply that I call it mediocrity from a part of public policy, from government, and this is the reason I call it that if I am able to think, some people are able to think, why are they not able to even take that into consideration? Number one. And I think we have to get from this island mentality to a mentality of to say that yes, we have to increase our avenues locally. It should be based on indigenous considerations, period. If it is based on indigenous considerations, what people indigenously want. And that's why I give the example of cooperation, right? The role of local governments, that if local governments have more power, and because they are less I mean, of course there is corruption when there's prosperity. For every civilization it happens. It's not something that it's an ideal case, no corruption happens. But leave corruption, I think a good part with local governments is they can do much better with the union government. So if that has possible, and if we see that happening even for languages and knowledge designs, is it viable to see? And with that thought, we can leave the viewers with this thing, maybe to have some other talk, maybe in future, in the coming months, about how to get over this gap, because we have pretty little bit time in this decade, let's say. I mean, it's still 2021, so we have 9 to 8 years left, let's say, fairly. So if we have 8 or 9 years left before getting on to a situation, because again, I'll tell you very honestly, what will happen is this myopic approach will lead in a way that okay, fine, you want to limit yourself, you might reconcile, because and that's the problem with the IAS also, right? I mean, why we don't come up with innovative approaches? We don't come up because we fear that if we do, it will be causing a diplomatic nightmare. Same happens in technology policy. You try to do something new, it will cause a diplomatic nightmare, which means that private actors need to come in and say, okay, fine, we'll back you if there's a nightmare. We'll help you. And I think there's not a problem. So I think to finalize this, what specific pointers can be suggested, and post that concluding remarks, 1 minute each. So let me start with Kiran, then Ameya, then Chetan, then Anurag. So Kiran, go ahead.
Yeah, policy is really like the central core of what needs to change, and it's not easy. I'm not a policy guy, but from my point of view, the core problem in India is actually the legal system. Abhivardhan is a lawyer, so let me put all the blame on his his brothers and sisters. Essentially, we have a top-down approach, colonial approach, sitting from Delhi and trying to micromanage things, and it doesn't understand where to stop. So it is not just related to technology policy, it's just a general disease that is affecting this thing. And how do we kind of give flexibility and localize the approach in different states and districts? Something that we really have to think, right? Otherwise, it's a trouble. It seems to be that the way that people are trying to do it. So let's say use this special economic zone, kind of create an area where the laws don't apply, essentially, and then something would happen. Maybe that is the answer, but for technology that's as dangerous as AI, when we don't have any regulation, it's also a disaster. So a special economic zone kind of thinking is not necessarily the best idea, because we also need to grow actually our intelligence and concepts in AI, and grow our people and engineers to kind of deal with it. So it's not a one-shop solution. We have to grow a solution. It takes several years, and we have to find a way how to get the judiciary out of our way. So it is really messing things up, and the democratic way of changing the government every 5 years is also not necessarily helping. We don't have a strategic sector in our nation where which can plan for 20 years, 30 years like that. So it's a serious problem. I look at the situation from a very, very practical point of view. It's not my ideal solution, but from a practical point of view, what I think would help is if the defense actually gets into the business. The defense is one of those few sectors where it sees a strategic imperative, and we are at a serious cyber threat. We have a serious cybersecurity issue in the country. So there needs to be some kind of a strategic investment, and it needs to work in some kind of a functional way. So that is one way. And other countries grew their AI technology through defense investments like China or United States. So it can happen also here, and maybe in partnership with local governments and private industry. So we need to have a strategic initiative. And let me say, it's not necessarily the only way. We can also have other ways to do it, but I don't know what is the easiest way. I am talking about the easiest way because if we don't do it, we are screwed. So we don't have much time. We really have to fix this up quickly. So yeah, I think I will stop here. But I would like to just add one small point. Let's say we try to do all our best to change the shape the policy and so on. Parallel to this, parallel to the government, parallel to the policy sector, there has to be work from private initiatives, from private sector, maybe NGOs, maybe voluntary groups who identify specific problems, like how do we promote local language education, translation, publication, maybe conferences, whatever. And they need to have set goals, like these goals need to be achieved in this year or so on. And the government has to help these kinds of agencies to do the job. Only through that way we can able to get at least some feedback to the government. Otherwise, yeah, we will not solve it. Very tough. I cannot solve it. Yeah.
Great. So before Amey adds, I'll just say that as we will go for the conclusion of this discussion, I'll show some portions of that report which we had written, just some basic solutions that we are trying to provide. Maybe people can brainstorm it. DM me at abhivardhan@icel.in. I'll be very happy to know your feedback, because in this, it's a very long report, like 50,000 words long. So we could not come up with proper systemic recommendations for both companies and governments. But we tried to at least make a background. So we have made the overtone. The overtone is done. Now I'll pass it on to Ameya to give his remarks, and I'll definitely show that afterwards. So Ameya, then Chetan, then Anurag. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So I think there's kind of two fronts, right? I'm glad that Kiran brought up the final point, which is that there's government policy in terms of what it can do to shape this, and then on the other hand, there's the question of what private citizens can do, right? And I think there needs to be progress on both fronts in parallel. So I think the biggest thing really is a change in mindset. I think that India as well as Indians need to dream bigger. I think we need to go from this mindset of just becoming consumers of technology into producers, right? I think there needs to be creation of like intellectual frameworks and really developing fundamental research and core technologies to become a leader, right? So what do we need to do about that, or in order to achieve that? Well, I think the educational system is a big part of it. I mean, if you look at other countries, for instance, we didn't talk about this much, but beyond AI, hardware is also an important space, like semiconductors, and this might be one of the big battlefronts coming up. It might interest people to know that India actually did have a lab that they started in Punjab in the early 1980s. It actually got burned down in a fire, and then I guess later they built something later. But it was somewhat of a half-hearted effort. And if you look at, say, the example of Taiwan, which also started looking into semiconductors around the same time, maybe late 70s, early 80s, they had a vision and they really tried to get expertise. For instance, people who know have training in chemical vapor deposition, or various technologies that are important for this, right? And I think they had infrastructure and educational system that backed up these ambitions. So yeah, I think we need to focus on more inclusive development and a more inclusive educational system to prop that up. I would say that so technology is something that can help us move in that direction. I think machine translation tools can help bridge the gap with Indic languages, but it is not a solution in itself, right? I mean, I think there needs to be effort from people. There needs to be a change in the way of thinking. I mean, even if you think, for instance, let's say we're just going to do the lazy solution, and somehow somehow machine learning translation tools are going to help us translate this entire body of technological literature into Indian languages. Even that's not that easy, because, as you know, a lot of these algorithms, they train on corpuses of data. And if you don't have that much data to train on to begin with, which is the case with many Indic languages in the space of science or technology, you're not going to get very good results. So you need to develop that corpus too. I think people need to create an ecosystem where they're creating original content in Indic languages. So I think that's where sort of the non-governmental side of it can take place in parallel, right? I think what we need is people who do have expertise in certain areas or know a lot about something to actually start writing and creating the resources and content. It could be making some blogs on whatever technical field you work in. It could be creating dictionaries or glossaries for technical terms, things like that. So I think that also needs to happen to rejuvenate the ecosystem.
Great. So I think Anurag can add in. Yeah, Anurag, go ahead.
So let me just make two quick points from an educationist point of view. So I think there's a need to first demystify AI, like Kiran was talking about. Reach out to people in as many as language possible. Discuss AI and discourse around AI in Indic languages, in regional languages, and also use. So, for example, we have really good frequency of radio and television access to that. Also, use those channels to reach out to as many people as possible. And the objective should be that like these kids, these children who are studying in their mother tongue medium schools, they should realize that this AI is not something which is only reserved for elites, or which is only reserved for children who are studying in English medium schools. And the second point which I want to make it is that create as much content as possible in Indian languages. For example, Khan Academy. So they have really good content on around these technologies, AI and all of that, but only in English, like majorly in English, and also some content in Hindi. There could be like government initiatives and other private initiatives like Tata's and other can also fund, where we create as much content as possible in Indian languages, especially in regional languages. Only when we have that content and we have that base, we can actually build upon it and create something else. So this is more from a like practical point of view, more from an educationist point of view.
So I just want to add, we need to popularize this creation of content, development of Indic language apps, popularization of AI-related apps in Indic languages, right? There is a way in which when we recognize that this is a vision, this is an objective, we need to go towards that, and we need to have measurable goals, milestones to get there. There is a way in which such things are solved in United States, for example, and other countries. They actually create challenges and cash prizes as awards. But this is a challenge, and these many people can compete in it. It can be universities that compete in it, or private companies, or private citizens. It could be as simple as the challenge is translate a technical text, or it could be the challenge is develop an app in Indian languages. So what's the best app? And these things can be popularized on TV or whatever, right? So when we have that in the public consciousness, that this is a strategy, and these challenges can be attempted. And we need to obviously have a set of reviewers and committee who can select these things, and this whole process would also be entertainment, so people can see it and rate it. So one interesting thing is, there can be an app for very quick translations, a challenge like a game show where you're given a sentence and you have to translate in, let's say, in Tamil or Manipuri or wherever, and who can do that, and that will be judged. So this is something that would also encourage this type of game shows and challenges that can encourage the participation of people. And they can be as technically complex or cognitively complex. And we have the tradition of the so-called avadhanam in Sanskrit poetry, which is a lot of sets of things that, challenging the memory and the cognitive skills of the people. We can, develop such kinds of games and also popularize. So what would be a poor way of popularizing is just putting advertisements on the newspaper or TV and nothing done, right? Because that is, my job is done. It's, if the others are not taking care of it, then what can I do? The government has to be a little bit more proactive, and also the the philanthropists, whoever is interested in this, have to have a more hands-on approach. And one way to do that is through creating awards and competitions, and then it will raise the public awareness of this issue.
So just one quick point, like Kiran was saying that, for example, how hackers movement was made popular in US. Like in India, we have such programs and such movements being organized, but again in English. And also, if you look at how many Olympiads, like especially in mathematics and science, are organized in local languages, all of them are in English. So, and these Olympiads, they actually create the base for children to go and build on it and go into AI and other technologies. But when these Olympiads themselves are happening only in English, then I think we are already lost. So we have to actually work from a base and start creating more, as much content as possible, and also organizing these programs in as many local languages as possible.
Great. So to conclude this, what I'll do is I'll just show some portions of my report, and also what I have recommended and my team has recommended, and I think we should do that. So just 1 minute. So this report is by the name of Regulatory Sovereignty in India, Indigenizing Competition Technology Law Approaches, ICLTR 001. This is one of the first reports we are working on. We are trying to also propose a regulatory sandbox framework for India, but that again will take time because that is another mess. So recommendations are actually on 4 areas, very basic. Everybody talks about decoloniality. I also worked on decoloniality a little bit. So I said, fine, you can come up with a decolonized coherentist approach. Very simply mean that there are 3 stages of technology law. First is coherentism. Coherentism is your, basic law enforcement, just enforce the law as it is in a rough manner. Second is having regulatory theory, which is, you have advanced technologies. Now you get into the field of regulation, having proper advanced regulators like Competition Commission, or I don't know, some finance related body or some environmental related body. These are regulators. And the last stage is technocracy. And technocracy is like what we can say Matrix. If you have watched Matrix, you know what it is. So that is technocracy, basically to say, for example, very brilliant example I give from the book of Roger Brownsford. For example, if you are in like a car which is automated, driverless car, and you are not fastening your seat belt, the car will automatically not work. That is technocracy through technology, or just enabling that retribution against the consumer. So what we suggested was that there can be a permeable indigeneity in policy. You can say that, fine, you are inspiring yourself on some aspects. People can read this. This is on page number 114. I'll not go in deep in it. And based on this PIP, permeable indigeneity, you can manifest and create your own indigenous ideas, because indigeneity is in the way because you are actually thinking in a creative manner at the first place. That is your indigenous achievement. And then you can have the role of Indic knowledge systems accordingly. Where actually I've taken constitutional law a little bit, but where I wish to talk about was not particularly this, but it was related to languages which I had stated. Just 1 minute. I think it is not here. Maybe it is there. I think, yeah, it is there. It is there. So this is a particular portion which is language contributes to further indigenization. The same thing which we have been saying, that if there is knowledge economy realities, let's understand the knowledge economy realities and for work on them in the much practical sense. Once that becomes possible, I think much avenues already exist. So to end this, please read the report. I can't give much briefing about it. Maybe we can have a session on it from AI now. I can have it with my co-authors, but not here. I think it's already 1 hour 50 minutes. So I think, I mean, if Kiran wants, we can break the record of 2 hour 30 minutes, but I don't wish to, because we have discussed everything meaningful. So since we've discussed everything meaningful, I'll say that uh, to end this, the simple answer to the question is: number one, there is mediocrity, fight it. Number two, you have the useful population, use it. Number three, the idea of Ministry of Cooperation is excellent. Go for the local governments. In fact, I'm suggesting it right away. My district is Prayagraj, or we can go to Lucknow, Canton, UP, or you can go to some other district like, I don't know. So Anurag, you may know that Ahmedabad is going to be changed by name to Karnavati. So let's say Karnavati, Gandhinagar, and all of that. All of these districts come together and formulate your own policy of education and approaches. Just democratize it. Use your private actors. See where you can mobilize. Do small. I think we have to think like an entrepreneur as well. So here we come with an end of this very interesting discussion on Indic knowledge designs and disruptive tech. Now, in a discussion with Ruchir on Anglosphere, I had stated that there's a lack of cultural salience. I always talk about this, that people are so obsessed about sharing their memes on Mona Lisa and comparing that with the mandir in Thanjavur and saying, what, Thanjavur mein achhe mandir hai because Mona Lisa is that. But they don't even know about architecture. They don't know we want to read about it, not they are interested to teach or even work in it. So sharing a meme and getting 6,000 likes on Twitter is not something I recommend. And it's something which this mediocrity should stop. So we are actually going to discuss this mediocrity in the next week on Saturday. So this discussion is going to be on cultural salience, understanding the Anglo-Saxon and Europe in a deeper way from the point of ontology. And I'm not going to release who are going to be the speakers. Watch it on Twitter yourself. Some really amazing panelists are going to be there. Expect a confrontational discourse. I'm already expecting 2 hour discourse. So it's going to be interesting. I'll be there, but it's going to be interesting. Let's discuss that because I think there can be avenues. So with on this satisfactory note, we end this session. Thank you so much who watched Indus Think. Thank you so much who watched the last episode for the feedback. We loved it. I have tried my best that all of us have, answered as many questions as possible related to policy, governance, education approaches, coloniality. Also, we have covered coloniality directly from a policy point of view and not from that point of view of emotion only, because that is where the problem comes in. So I think with this, we end the session. Thank you so much all, and stay safe. I hope that India wins that match against Pakistan. I know people are angry about it right now, and I see Twitter, so I'll not comment on that. I wish India wins the match, but yeah, I really wish they do. If they even don't do, I mean, get on to get on to a better situation, and win the World Cup. Get your first ranking in the test. That's the big thing for me. I mean, Pakistan is a mediocrity. Who cares? So, yeah, great. So, thank you so much. We end the session and Namo.
Okay.